Bluegrass Airport is an American aviation story. Its remarkable history has been chronicled through a series of oral history interviews. We are speaking with Bob Cole, who worked at Bluegrass Airport for more than 33 years, first as a station agent for Eastern Airlines, then as station manager for Comair. He took his first flight lesson at Meadow Field in Lexington on January 1st, 1941. Bob, when did you first get interested in airplanes?
Well, when I was about 6 years old, I had a school buddy who lived about a half a mile from me over at Lawrenceburg, my hometown. And he had a clubhouse, and we used to build model airplanes, balsa wood and fabric, rubber band motors. And that was my first interest in airplanes.
Do you remember the first time you saw an airplane fly overhead?
No, I don't. I just can't remember that.
How about the first time you rode in an airplane?
Oh, yes. August 1936, 14 years old. Charlie Miller, an old barnstormer, came to Lawrenceburg. He'd bring in an air show about every year, by the way. He had an old Alexander Eagle Rock biplane and a Curtiss Robin high-wing monoplane. And he had a parachute jumper and put on a little show. But anyway, August of 36, I took my first flight in the old biplane out of Mr. Holly Witherspoon's cowpaster. Cost me a big $1. That was when I decided I wanted to learn to fly, and I loved it.
Bob, talk a little about Holly Field.
I don't remember Holly Field. It was there, but I don't remember it. The one out at Meadow.
Did you fly out of Meadow?
I used to go to Meadow in the late 30s, and I took my first flight lesson at Meadow, January 1st, 1941. That was my first flight lesson. Well, I was 19.
Was your family supportive of your interest in flying?
My mom was not supportive, but she wasn't against it. But my dad, he didn't think much of it.
So you went to work at Bluegrass Field. How long were you there?
Total 33 years, a little over 33 years. Well, I started May the 14th, 1951 with Eastern Airlines. I was a station agent for 29 years. And when they left in 1980, our family didn't want to move, so I retired. January 1st, 1982, Comair came to town, and I was station manager of Comair for 4 years. And I got a little tired of it, and I retired from Comair December 31st, 1985. So it was exactly 4 years at Comair.
Would you tell us about the early terminal?
Well, it was I have pictures of it at home, but it was a real small terminal. And out on the ramp side, it had a white fence, which we call the rubberneck stand. The reason we called it the rubberneck stand because onlookers would go out and watch the planes and hang over that white fence. But it was real small. The walls had murals around of horse farms and various farms around Fayette County.
Tell us about the baggage system.
The baggage was unloaded from the planes onto baggage carts and wheeled around to the south side of the terminal. And there was sort of an awning over where the bags were placed out there on the left, or south side.
Do you have any stories related to your days at Bluegrass Field?
I'm going to tell you one story. It's not a story, it's true. For the days of security and all that, this is about 1952, 53. We had Martin 404s, which is a 40-passenger aircraft. And We called a flight for boarding one morning, and the people went out to board the flight. The belly of the Martin 404 dropped, this door dropped over where you put the baggage in. We had these red stands that you'd stand on to put the baggage in. And I was in operations along with our chief agent. And the chief agent had to be looking out the window. He said, "What in the world is that fellow doing out there?" And I looked out the window, and here's this man trying to climb into the baggage compartment. He was up on that red stand trying to climb in. So he went out there, and a few minutes he came back in shaking his head and says, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "Sir, can I help you?" He said, "Son," says, "I'm blind. I'm just trying to find my seat." That was sad, wasn't it? But that's the way things were in those days.
What was the atmosphere like at Bluegrass Field?
We knew everybody. There was only about fewer than 100 on the whole airport, including maintenance people on the field. And you knew everybody. And we were just one big family.
Are there any other things that stand out in your mind about those days?
We didn't have security like it is today. It wasn't needed. I've seen several presidents here. I saw Eisenhower twice. I'll have to tell you about Eisenhower on his second trip here. For some reason, they assigned me to be fire guard when he started up to leave. He was in a Lockheed Constellation 4-engine plane. He went up the steps, turned around, tipped his Hamburg, went in. Crew chief told me, he said, "Now when we leave in a hurry. You be careful out there." I thought to myself, well, so what? I work them every day. Eastern starting order on the Connie, as I recall, was 3421. They started all 4 engines simultaneously on Eisenhower's plane. I never saw as much blue smoke in all my life. I've never seen that done before or since. But that stands out in my mind.
Would you tell us about learning to fly?
I took my first lesson at Meadow, January 1st, 1941. I went into service, into the cadets, and I washed out because they found a scar on one lung. And I was a flight line mechanic on B-25s. And on the side, I was working at night on the line in Oklahoma. In the daytime, I'd get me a pass and go to town to take flight lessons. And I soloed October the 12th, 1944, in a Tailorcraft. And after the war, I flew for 3 years over at Silver Lake Airport in Frankfurt, Bluegrass Field. And I flew in the Ronca Champs for 3 years in Frankfurt. Then I was employed here at Eastern 51. In 1952, I bought a Ronca Champ and rebuilt it at Bluegrass Aeromotive here on the field. It took me 2 years. And I flew it for a while and then sold it. And I miss flying every day.
Would you tell us about that plane, the Tailorcraft?
Well, it was a 2-place high-wing monoplane, had a Franklin 50 engine and 50 horsepower. Let me tell you about the instructor. His name was Frank Ray. He worked in the Oklahoma oil fields. He used to take me up and literally scare me to death. He'd do inside loops, spins, wing overs, everything that plane would do. And I built up my time for somewhere around 8 hours. I knew it would be soloing before long. So I went in one day and Frank wasn't there. This other man was there. He looked at me sort of weird, introduced himself, said, "I'm so-and-so. I'm a primary flight instructor for the Army in Vernon, Texas. And I'm going to be here moonlighting a little bit. I'm going to be your instructor from now on. By the way, I have to tell you this. Frank didn't have a license. I spent all this money He couldn't sign the logbook. He said, "Where's your logbook?" I pulled it out. He started scratching through Frank's name, putting his name in, and he soloed me. But Frank could fly. Let me tell you, he could fly. He was something else. But he didn't have a license.
Do you remember when the new terminal opened at Bluegrass Airport?
We moved into it in April '76, and it was wonderful. Of course, I missed the old one, but the new one was nice.
You were associated with Bluegrass Airport for so many years. What events do you think were important to the future of the airport?
Well, of course, the lengthening of the runways. When I began work with Eastern, I believe 422 was 5,000 feet. Then they lengthened it one time, I've forgotten what year. Then I think now it's about 7,000 feet. Of course, with the jets coming along, we needed every foot of space we could get. That was a big help. And then, of course, later on, the jetways were added down at the gates, which was a big help for inclement weather and so forth. But it's a big improvement.
Bob, talk about other dignitaries you saw at Bluegrass Airport.
Well, I saw Lyndon Johnson, saw Nixon, saw Governor Wallace, the one man who was shot, tried to assassinate him. Many movie dignitaries, Burt Lancaster, Sonia Haney, dozens of them. Saw Kennedy. He came in before he was running for president, and he came in late one night in his own plane. I think he had a Convair named Caroline, and he came in late one night. Then I saw his brother, Robert Kennedy. He flew down from D.C. on Eastern and stood on one of our baggage carts out there and talked to the crowd who met him. He was the brother who was assassinated. Saw Queen Elizabeth, many over the years.
Did you see Elizabeth Taylor when she was here?
Oh, sure. How could I miss her?
Did you see her beautiful violet eyes?
Oh, yes. I remember seeing Liz Taylor when she came in to make the movie with Montgomery Clift.
How did you land that first job at Bluegrass Field?
Be honest with you, I don't know. I came over here in March of '51 and applied for a job, and they called me to Atlanta, the Eastern office, for an interview in early May, and I took my logbook with me, and to this day I don't understand. The interviewer said to me, "How'd you like to fly for Eastern?" I said, "No, I believe I want to be an agent." Why I said that, I don't know. But of course, my life would have been completely different. And I look back at it today, and I wouldn't have had my kids. So everything works out for the best.
Did you travel much when you were working for the airlines?
Occasionally. I did more traveling with Comair than I did with Eastern. I was on a special operations committee with Comair. There were 2 station managers and 2 captains, and we'd go around to the different cities that Comair served. This was back in the early '80s, and we were setting up specialized procedures, standardization procedures at the different airports. I enjoyed that.
Bob, were there any times that you thought were difficult at the airport, like the public controversy when they lengthened the runways?
Well, it didn't concern me too much. There were a few sad things that happened out here. A couple of accidents. The plane that went down over at Keeneland, I knew that pilot, Bob Young. He took off on 3-3, which went right over 3,500 foot runway. And my wife was a travel agent at the time, and 3 or 4 of her customers lost their lives in that crash. See what happened. Eastern and Piedmont Airlines would use charter services occasionally. Give you an example. That plane had just come back from Louisville for a trip for Eastern. We'd have passengers booked on the flight coming down from the east, coming down here and going to Louisville and on. And they'd have maybe 20-minute connections in Louisville. And that plane could get to be late 15 minutes and you'd have to do something. And we'd charter Lexington Air Taxi to cover for the passengers that would miss connection. And that plane had just returned from Louisville to cover one of our flights. And when it went down at Keeneland, it was covering a flight for Piedmont, Flight 73 of Piedmont. There was one that went into the ground here, landing on 4, I believe, one Saturday afternoon, owned by R.C. Cola. Same day that the one that Huntington killed all those football players. Those are things I don't like to think about.
Did you interact much with people in general aviation?
We knew them all. I rebuilt my plane at Bluegrass Field, which was adjacent to Bomber Flying Service. We knew all those people. Back then, everybody was, well, just not that many worked here. Somewhere between 50 and 100, the whole airlines and the field personnel.
Any other things related to the time spent out here?
We had our characters. But overall, it was a lot of fun. I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
It sounds like that job was tailor-made for you.
Well, I liked it. I missed it. I still miss it.
When was the last time you flew an airplane yourself?
54. I sold my airplane in 1954 to Clark Carstner, who ran a GI flying school down in Monterey, that's in Owen County. And I ferried it over to Clark the last day I flew. And I missed it. I love my flying days out of Silver Lake. Oh, I'll tell you, man, I used to know. You asked me in the letter, I believe, about mentors. I had several mentors in aviation. Charlie Miller, the barnstormer who I mentioned. Everett Pappy Gentry, who was a flight instructor out of Bowman Field, Lowell, and Cool Meadow later on. And Albert Ucci. Albert Ucci ran this little grass field called Silver Lake over Frankfurt back in the late 30s. I used to ride my Harley Davidson over to Silver Lake and hang out with Albert. And I'll tell you this little story. We had a big fair in Lawrenceburg every August. And I was over at Albert's one Saturday in August of 1939. And I said, Albert, there's a little field right adjacent to the fairground up home. The big fair is going on. I said, if you want to go up there, hop some passengers, I'll sell for you. He thought about it a few minutes. He said, let's go. All he had was a J3. All he could sell was one seat. But you got to remember, this was during the height of the Depression. We got up to Lawrenceburg. He made 5 approaches before he got that plane down on that postage stamp. And we taxied up to the fence by the fairground. Here comes this old man out who I recognized. He jumped all over Albert. He said, who gave you permission to land here? That I may not let you out. Albert talked his way out of it. I felt so bad about that. But anyway, Albert had a hamburger stand in Frankfurt, selling these burgers for a nickel a piece, help pay for his flight. He left Frankfurt about 40 or 41, went to Cincinnati, flight instructor for Queen City Flying Service. Then he went with Pan American. He wound up as Juan Tripp's personal pilot. Juan Tripp was president of Pan American World Airways. They put Albert Ucci into the Aviation Hall of Fame in the year 2000. And guess who they used for his presenter? Me. I looked Albert up on the internet here a year or two ago, and he's estimated to be worth over $4 billion now. He's about 93 years old. He sold it was Flight Safety International that he formed. He sold it out to Warren Buffett, but he's still active in the company. He was one of my biggest mentors. Then, of course, last but not least was Lindbergh. And by the way, I saw Lindbergh here one time. Most people have never heard about it, but there was a place down here around Harrisburg that was being considered for the site of the Air Force Academy. I was working in ramp one day, and I looked out, this big plane came in, these people got off, and Lindbergh was one of them. He was on the search committee for the Air Force Academy, which of course wound up in Colorado Springs. But he was one of my mentors too.